So good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, colleagues. It's a pleasure to connect with you all today. My name is Corley Pretorius. I am the Deputy Director of UNEP WCMC, and I'll be the moderator for today's session. So big welcome, everyone. We are excited to share with you today a sneak preview of the new UN Biodiversity Lab spatial data platform. And this session is the first of a series of digital discovery events that will be organized over the next 4 months by the Digital Transformation Task Force. We welcome the new network of UNEP digital champions that are joining the event today. And we also welcome your questions and feedback throughout the session. But first, thank you for being with us today. I know it is, as Masonda just said, we are all dealing with the new normal. For many of us means working from home, schooling from home, dealing with internet challenges and all sorts of other things. We hope that you and your family are in good health and your friends and everyone is continue to remain healthy and safe. So next slide, please. Before we begin, I would like to highlight a few things, and this is just sort of the technical support that our UNDP colleagues can provide with us. If you have technical issues, please send a private Zoom message to Marion Marigo or to an email at marion.marigo@undp.org. Yep, dropped in the chat box. Thank you, Marion. Your microphones will be muted during the presentations, and this will help us to make sure the speakers are heard clearly. If you would like to ask a question, you have 2 options. You can type your question in the Zoom chat box. We will collect these questions and address them during the Q&A, or during the discussion, you can also raise your hand, the virtual hand raising in the control panel, and we will open your microphone for you during the segments of today's discussion. We would like to ask you, if you have technical issues, please write directly to Marion and don't post this in the general chat box. We encourage you to turn on your video if bandwidth allows so that we can see each other. It's always in the virtual environment, it's a little bit more social than just seeing a name. And it's nice to recognize colleagues from across UNEP and UNEP WCMC joining us in this webinar today. Finally, we will be recording today's session, so just that everyone's aware of that. And Marion will make the session available also in the UNEP Discovery channel, but on the NBSAP Forum YouTube channel as well. Marion has a link for the YouTube channel as well. Thank you very much. And then the next slide, please, Marion. So a quick overview of today's agenda. I'll do a few opening remarks about linking what we are doing with UNEP, with the UN Biodiversity Lab to the UNEP Digital Transformation Strategy. Building on this, we'll hear from Jamie Irvin, manager of the Global Program on Nature for Development at UNDP, and she will share how spatial data can be used as a powerful tool for action, putting nature at the center of sustainable development. Third, we'll have a brief introduction to the UN Biodiversity Lab platform and discuss this One UN partnership that we have created and been running over the past 2 years. And finally, we'll have the opportunity for a sneak peek of the revamped Biodiversity Lab, very exciting, which we will launch publicly in January 2021. We really want the session to be as interactive as possible, so please don't hesitate to add your comments, raise your hand, and engage with us throughout the session. So that's the introduction. Next slide, or we can leave it at that. Yeah, just a few general remarks and a little bit of context on why tools like the UN Biodiversity Labs provide an essential service to governments and decision makers. The UN Biodiversity Lab is a One UN partnership that unites UNEP and UNDP in a joint effort to put nature at the center of sustainable development. So what we're trying to do is to really make the biodiversity data accessible to a wide range of decision makers. And as you know, nature is one of the pillars of UNEP's next medium-term strategy as well. Our partnership is underpinned by a common policy and advocacy agenda on nature. We really want to see action on nature. And we want to encourage government, institutions, stakeholders, the private sector to take this into consideration when they do their planning, their spatial prioritization, and so forth. It is really premised also on their appreciation of user needs and requirements, and the provision of robust data and transparency and scientific analysis. For us, it is abundantly clear, and I think we're probably speaking to a bunch of like-minded individuals in this specific webinar, that we need to accelerate and scale action for nature. We can support states to ensure that their obligations under the multilateral environmental agreements are also implemented. And we have this appreciation that that action is not only by the Ministries of Environment, but we really need to support the work across different ministries, different groups of stakeholders. And the final consideration that we are working with is that biodiversity is context specific. And there's a lot of information that's location specific that needs to bear on these decisions. In UN Biodiversity Lab, we bring together this dimension of contextualization, the multi-sector relevance, the ability to replicate, scale, and accelerate action for nature. And this, in terms of the UNEP digitization strategy, is really the benefit of providing this digital service. To share UNDP's vision for our joint work and to showcase what UN Biodiversity Lab can offer, I will hand it over to Jamie now, the manager of UNDP's global program on nature and for development. Jamie, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Corley, and allow me to share my screen for a moment. So what I'd like to do is give a little bit of background to how we got where we are to where we are. So we are supporting two elements here. The first is the United Nations Biodiversity Lab, and the second is an innovation we're really excited about called Mapping of Essential Life Support Areas. But first, UN Biodiversity Lab. In 2014, as we were supporting countries with their national biodiversity strategies and action plans, we noticed that many countries didn't even have spatial data in their NBSAP, which is astonishing when you think that this is a roadmap for biodiversity in their country. In fact, in a review of all NBSAPs and national reports, we found that the average number of maps was between 3, 4, sometimes 5. And that meant that countries simply weren't spatializing their actions for biodiversity. As a pilot, we worked with Zimbabwe. They had no maps whatsoever in their country, so we can help you. So we put together, with the help of the Pulse Lab, UN Pulse Lab, a series of about 35 maps. And we started to put them together. This is a map of Zimbabwe. It shows protected areas, it shows fire, and we're also able to do community mapping. And they began to see patterns of wetland degradation and fire in the wetlands that support the water security for Harare. And that's when the penny dropped. And the planners started to say, you know, this helps put into context the water insecurity issues that we're facing. And we realized at UNDP that this is the intersection of nature and development. And we saw this mapping potential as a way that we can put nature, as Corley said, at the very heart of sustainable development. Fast forward 2 years, in 2018, we launched the UN Biodiversity Lab as a tool primarily to help with national reporting and national planning. We were able to identify about 100 layers of different data sets around nature and development. This is an example of something around crop suitability. This is an example of groundwater stress. We're able to identify those layers that are at the intersection of nature and nature-dependent national development goals. We built this lab with the help of MapX, with the help of UN Environment, in partnership with the Convention on Biological Diversity, as a one-stop shop where countries could go for trusted data and begin to do some analysis. And it wasn't so much the individual layers that countries really found helpful, it was the overlap of layers. Let me show you what I mean. Here's Zimbabwe again, and you can begin to see that they are actually, when you overlay key biodiversity areas and protected areas, they're one of the top countries in terms of protection. They have 98% of their terrestrial key biodiversity areas under some form of protection. This is a success story. And it's only through this overlay of data you begin to get the insight that allows countries to take decisions. Here's another layer of management effectiveness of protected areas. We began to see patterns of which protected areas really were effective in terms of outcomes and which ones needed some more support. So that was the beginning of the UN Biodiversity Lab. The use case was to support national biodiversity planning, and specifically for the 6th national report to the Convention on Biological Diversity. We found that the average number of maps went up several X. So in the most recent data, we saw between 15 and 20 maps per national biodiversity reports. And this is a significant achievement. Many countries went above and beyond with 30, 40, and 50 maps. We began to see an appetite. We thought, well, we're on to something. So Annie will give a little bit more about the UN Biodiversity Lab, but I wanted also to share the idea of this mapping of essential life support areas. When we started thinking about how countries were making decisions, we were thinking about most countries, or most, I should say, biodiversity conservation mapping and planning begins and ends with mapping of things like natural capital, intactness, human footprint, protected areas. And then they look at threatened areas, key biodiversity areas, connectivity, really mapping just for biodiversity using principles of systematic conservation planning. And we thought, what if you could take that one step further? What if you could map areas important for water security, areas important for food security, for disaster risk reduction, for carbon sequestration, for jobs and livelihoods? And if you're able to use the same principles of systematic conservation planning, of optimizing the areas to come up with a single map, you could, this data here for Cuba is fake, but the ones in colored are real. You could come up with a map of where, if you could protect, restore, and manage, you could achieve all of your nature-dependent sustainable development goals and the 3 Rio Conventions. We embarked on a pilot phase with Costa Rica, Uganda, Colombia, Peru, and Kazakhstan. And we piloted this process of mapping essential life support areas. We came up with a first iteration map. We worked with more than 100 officials within Costa Rica, and were able to allow them to tweak the knobs and levers to raise up and dial down different priorities so that they were able to develop a customized map. We developed a quote recipe, and so we have a 10-step process that we're very happy to share. Annie on this call and Marion would be happy to share all of the different lessons that we've had in these 5 countries. And we've also been able to land it at the highest level. The results of it actually went to the president's page in Costa Rica. You see Carlos Manuel Rodriguez, the Minister of Energy and Environment, and also it landed outside of the ministries of environment with agriculture, with transportation, with other ministries. Here are just some maps that show you different iterations. And here it's important to note, you see the different scenarios. If a country wants to protect, restore, and manage 20% or 17%, or in the case of Peru, 30%, we see different iterations. And this allows countries to develop scenarios that would help them meet their own national development goals. We're seeing major champions. This is Carlos Manuel Rodriguez, now head of the Global Environment Facility, and he's saying spatial data is transforming how we're able to manage our country. And we're seeing other champions emerge for the issue of spatial data, especially in that nexus between nature and development. So I want to wrap up with how we see the world and how we see WCMC and other players and other data sets fit together into one package. We see key data that underpin the UN Biodiversity Lab. It's as good as the layers that comprise it. So we see data like the dynamic world that Steve will talk about being a new innovation that will enrich the UN Biodiversity Lab. We see data such as Nature Map. This is a huge innovation, and this allows us to have an underpinning data that we can share with countries and say, this is what scientists believe is the best iteration of optimizing carbon, water, and biodiversity. We see data like the WDPA. This is WCMC's flagship database. This is absolutely fundamental to the success of the UN Biodiversity Lab, because this is the undisputed place to go for protected areas. Together, these many layers, whether it's 100 or 150 or more, provide an accessible, trusted platform for governments, but also for other actors. And this platform has vetted data sets, and it is supported by the Convention on Biological Diversity, the UN UNEP, the GEF, and UNDP. We see the ELSA mapping process as a national prioritization process that involves applying the principles of systematic conservation planning to prioritizing these nature-dependent development planning goals. It's owned by governments, owned by communities. We provide the tools and the data, and then we equip them to set their own goals and to be able to tweak those goals to get just what they want. It allows multiple scenarios, iterations, and review. What we're seeing now is an explosion of use cases. We began by seeing a need for mapping in national biodiversity plans and strategies and the National Biodiversity Report. And this is a fairly narrowly defined use case. But now we're beginning to see that this process could support the global and national indicators for the Convention on Biological Diversity. We're seeing in Peru that the government wants to use the UN Biodiversity Lab and the ELSA mapping process to chart a course for green recovery planning involving indigenous people and scaling up co-management models. In Colombia, it's all about water planning, so that they would like to develop the system that is focusing on water as their highest priority. In Uganda, it's about disaster risk reduction. Kazakhstan, it's about agricultural planning and regenerative ag. In Brazil, this is about possibly independent verification of deforestation. This is an interesting conversation we're beginning to have. We're seeing an enormous appetite for indigenous peoples saying, we would love to have access to this data because it helps us advocate for our rights. We're seeing organizations like UNDP. We've mapped all of our UNDP supported protected areas, and the GEF has expressed an interest in this as well. The point here is that the original use case was very narrow, but as we're going down this path, we're seeing an enormous explosion of use cases. This is just the tip of the iceberg. We have 5 countries lined up for the next phase beginning in October of Haiti, Nepal, Dominican Republic, and Ecuador. We are in early discussions with Papua New Guinea. These are very preliminary. They have not yet been landed at the country, but these are just our best thoughts of their preliminary interest. And then the last slide I want to share is that we will be launching, and Steve will be talking about this, the next phase of the UN Biodiversity Lab 2.0. Corley, with that, I turn it back over to you.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Jamie. And that was a great sneak preview, I must say, with some great visuals. Now that we have some of the context, let's dive into more details around the UN Biodiversity Lab. I'd like to turn the floor over to my colleague, Annie Vennick, coordinator of UN Biodiversity Lab for UNDP. Annie will provide a quick overview of what the lab is, the functionalities, before we go over to the live demo. Annie, please.
Let me get off of mute. All right. Thank you so much, Corley, and thanks so much to everyone who's here today. As David said, we have nearly 90 people, which is fantastic. So greetings from the west coast of the US, where it is still very dark outside. So Jamie provided us with an introduction to some of the uses we're seeing of spatial data across countries. And before we dive into the demo of our new UN Biodiversity Lab platform, I'll just provide a super quick overview of what the platform is for those of you who don't know, and a recap for those of you who have heard it before. So let's start with a very basic question. The UN Biodiversity Lab is a free open source platform that provides users with access to some of the world's best global spatial data layers. They can access these data, visualize them, and run analyses all without any GIS experience. As Jamie mentioned, UN Biodiversity Lab emerged out of a partnership between UNDP, UNEP, and the CBD Secretariat to support governments and policymakers in their commitments to the Convention on Biological Diversity. But as Jamie just finished discussing, we see a wide range of applications for the platform and the spatial data it contains beyond this initial use case. So just to give you a brief idea of some of the features that we offer through the platform, I'll give you a sneak peek here, and Steve will go into more of a live demo just after this. So first, we offer access to over 100 global spatial data layers. So these are maps of biodiversity, of protected areas, carbon sequestration, sustainable development. UN Biodiversity Lab is also the place to access data that's emerging through 2 NASA-supported projects that help to identify the best of the last tropical forests. Third, and this is really getting to the heart of the platform, we offer users the ability to create private workspaces where they can upload their data and visualize it and analyze it in combination with any of the global data sets we have available. So for the governments we've worked with, this has been a really powerful way to enable them to use their national data, one of better quality or higher resolution, in combination with some of the other global data layers that we have available. Fourth, on the new platform, we offer customizable widgets and dashboards for easy reporting and summaries. And fifth, the ability to conduct basic analyses and create maps. So who uses UN Biodiversity Lab? As we mentioned, we started out with this very niche focus on policymakers working specifically on biodiversity. And we have over 300 policymakers from 61 countries who are active on the site today. The platform is also fully accessible to the public, and we have over 50,000 views of the site this year. As we move forward with revamping the site and launching this new version, we're also really interested to explore different user cases. And for all of the UNEP colleagues joining today, we're interested to hear from you about what you need when it comes to spatial data. So just to keep things a little bit active, we're going to use one of Zoom's features to ask you which of the features are most relevant for you. So Marion, if you could launch the poll for everyone, you should see a box that's popping up in the middle of the screen, and you have the option to select one or multiple options. So you have access global data layers, upload my data to a secure private workspace, use dashboards to summarize key metrics, run basic analyses, and create maps. So I'm going to give you maybe about 10 more seconds. I see a lot of answers coming in. And then I will end the poll and share the results back. All right, it looks like we have votes from over 50 of you. So I'm going to end the poll and share it back. So it looks like the dashboards are a big hit, as well as the access to global data layers, followed by running analyses, creating maps, and the lowest is uploading data. So Steve, for reference, as you're demoing up next. All right.
Fabulous. Thank you so much, Annie.
Oh, Corley, before I'm just gonna, I have like 3 more slides left. And then
I thought you were going to hand over to Steve. That was a cue for me. Go ahead, and my apologies, Annie.
No worries. All right, so for those of you who are familiar with UN Biodiversity Lab, this should look like a familiar site. In January, you will see this view on the platform, and Steve will be giving us a sneak peek of all the things behind the scenes. But to explain why we're launching this new version of UN Biodiversity Lab, I just wanted to very briefly highlight a few of the challenges we faced with the old version and how we're addressing them in the new version. So I'm just going to pull out a few of the points on the screen so we have more time for the demo, and you can read the other ones. But one of the things I really want to emphasize here is that we heard from diverse stakeholders and partners about the need for seamless communication with other platforms. So this is both pulling data from national data repositories and regional data repositories, as well as sharing the data and functionalities that we have with other partners working on this space, in this space. So to address this, the new version of the site will have a fully functioning API that enables us to connect to this digital ecosystem of stakeholders and users working in the area of spatial data. Another really key area for us was that on the previous iteration of the platform, we could only conduct analyses and enable users to download vector data. The new version of the platform will enable analyses for both raster and vector data, as well as downloads where permitted by the data providers. We also had a summary of other needs and wants that the first iteration of the platform didn't quite address. And so we've worked closely with users to redesign the new platform to meet these needs. So you can see a few more of those that I've listed on the screen, and we're happy to discuss more about this during the Q&A. But in the interest of time, and so we can see more of the new platform, I will wrap up here and hand it back over to Coralie.
Right, thank you, Annie, and apologies for the interruption. I was scrolling up and down the participants list to see whether we have any hands raised or any comments, but I haven't seen any so far. So if you have any comments, colleagues, again, please raise your hand or post to us in the chat. But with that, I would like to pass the mic to Dr. Stephen Brumby, Director of Geographic Visualization Lab at National Geographic Society, to give us a sneak peek of the tools and the functionalities that will be available on the new platform. So this is the first session of several that we will be hosting to build momentum towards the launch of the platform for the public in January 21. Steve, please, the floor is yours.
Hey there, everyone. I'm Stephen Brumby at National Geographic Society. And let me see if I am able to share this screen. Can people see the screen? Yes. Okay, well, thank you everybody for your time. So what we're going to do here is give a fairly brief demo of the new version of UN Biodiversity Lab, the system. We've been developing this software at National Geographic Society. This is an open source system, and the intention is that this system will be hosted by United Nations using this open source, freely available code base, which I'll go into as we go along. To follow the pattern of use that was described now by all the speakers this morning, let me start by focusing on a country to motivate this. So we've been doing a lot of work with Costa Rica. So let me zoom into Costa Rica. And some of this will look very familiar to folks. You have a country. We have a number of layers. These are standard layers that are currently provided on UN Biodiversity Lab. And these have been chosen by a joint working group of folks at UN Development Program, as well as UN Environment Program, WCMC folks. And okay, so these are the usual data sets. When I first went to the country, though, you notice there were some additional data layers that have been chosen to go a further step, which is to turn them into what we call an indicator. An indicator is a basic form of analysis where we know for many of our users, they like having the spatial data, but they would also like to know very quickly what is the sort of total final number for a given location. So in this case, for Costa Rica, we can turn the accumulated tree loss coming from Global Forest Watch into an automatically reported number, which is that there was 2,300 square kilometers of tree loss since 2000. Okay, and for each of these data layers that are being produced in this indicator, there's information about where does the data come from, a link to the underlying science paper, a link to go get the underlying data if you want to do further analysis, references and licensing and various stuff. Okay, and in addition to tree loss, we have these indicators for a number of key variables that are essential to national reporting to do with conventional and biological diversity. So we have the UNEP WCMC Biodiversity Intactness Index. We have vegetation health, which starts to get at things like regions that might be experiencing drought conditions. We have land use land cover. Here we have land use land cover coming from the European Space Agency, which I'll return to later. We have the WDPA database of protected areas showing the percentage of the country that has terrestrial protection at the moment, how much is protected, how much is unprotected, and we can also look at the IUCN categories. We have terrestrial carbon. This is the biomass carbon and the soil carbon figures coming from the new Nature Map consortium results that were only recently released. And we have human footprint. So we have a number of these data sets that update on different timescales, and we'll get back to that in a sec. So we have for every country, we have a dashboard like that. We have all these layers that can be shown, and we can show the combinations of layers. So if we go back to Costa Rica for a second, we can show, for example, the combination of WDPA and also tree loss. Okay, so you can sort of see these things overlaid, and we'll be adding the ability to also calculate the combinations of those things. Okay. The other thing I wanted, so that's being able to show layers and in combinations, and these metrics that provide these summaries for any given shape. The next thing I want to show, and I think I want to emphasize that this is a sort of an enhanced feature that will hopefully become a strength of the new system as people get a chance to try it out, is the ability to have private organizations. So here, this is sort of the default view of the system. Here, National Geographic Society has created its own private area. And in this private area now, we have some additional places and some additional layers. So we can look at, for example, nighttime lights. Okay, so here's an additional layer that, actually this is a layer, nighttime lights, that is on the base system. But here we're saying we have an additional layer, and we have some additional places for which we can calculate metrics. So for example, we have, as an additional place, we can look at an individual protected area. So here is, this is an example of a protected area that's actually very dark, which is because it's a good protected area. Here we have a protected area that's done a very nice job of sort of excluding deforestation from within its boundaries. This is Gorongosa National Park in Mozambique. So we can show protected areas for ourselves. We can show species range extents. Here's Grevy's zebra. This is that lives. It's native to Kenya and Ethiopia. In Ethiopia, there's a reintroduced pocket, but otherwise the main range extent is in Kenya. We can also support, at National Geographic Society, we're starting to work with indigenous peoples groups. So we can also look at land of an IPLC, in this case, a indigenous group in Chiapas. And we can provide dashboards like this, which were historically only available to countries or to very large groups, including companies, we can now provide this to any group. And that's one of the key reasons for the private organizations. There are certain polygons that you would like to keep private, either while you're developing the analysis or because in general you don't want to share this data. Okay, so that's the other key thing about these protected areas. These private organizations, you have an administration tool that allows you to manage your private area, and we're designing this management tool to also be sort of a modern design and easy to use. So for example, in this private organization of National Geographic Society, we have a way to add to look at the places that we've added. So here's this Gorongosa National Park again. And there's a way here to add new areas, to update the information, to edit the information that goes with any given place, and to calculate these metrics for the region by just hitting a button and off it goes. Okay, so again, there's a lot here. We're happy to go into more details for folks and provide documents that describe all this capability, but I just wanted to show this. In an organization, you're also able to control the users who are members of the organization. You're able to control the data sets that are being uploaded. And at some point in the future, we will also allow you to add your own metrics. So the indicators that appear on the left-hand panel. So here we have, here you can control who is a user of the system. There's a full system here for controlling access to your private data. I mentioned before actually that we have the nature map carbon data on this system. In fact, the carbon data was on the system pre-publication, and we were able to do that safely because we had the carbon data initially in a private space. After the nature map papers, the carbon paper in particular, appeared in the peer-reviewed literature, we then moved that data set from the private space to the public space with, so that now everybody can access that data set. So that's an example of another use for the private orgs, being able to share pre-publication data, so data that you intend to share publicly, but which at the moment is still protected. Okay, the last thing I would like to show, well, actually two more things quickly to show. One is that there is an ability to translate the system. So at the moment, actually, this is being done through a toolbar at the top, but this will become integrated into the system by the end of the year. When you have a layer, so for example, here's land use land cover for Costa Rica again. Now, of course, when we're working with the government of Costa Rica, it would be very convenient for this to actually be in Spanish. And the good news is that automated translation of languages into a wide variety of languages is now reasonably good. You would never say that this is as good as the translation that a human would do, but for being able to quickly offer a capability to do translation into many languages, we're experimenting with this as a good enough solution initially. Okay, so we can show that we can do translation. Okay, so the two more things. So one is that we want to show, so one of the things that we're doing with our private organizations is that we are working with certain countries to develop ELSA maps. And so for Costa Rica, we are able to show as an extra layer the Costa Rican ELSA map. Okay, so here is the map. So Jamie showed a sort of precursor of this, and this is still a work in progress. This is not the final map produced by the government of Costa Rica from a range of inputs, including things like the nature map data inputs, the data layers. But this is a way for them to start to look at their current map that they are producing and to compare it with things like where are the, how does this map that they're proposing, how does it compare to the existing WDPA protected areas? So you can see in this case, they're able to show this is where they're proposing to extend protection, this is where they're proposing to restore, this is where they're proposing to manage. And also these are the urban areas where they need to avoid trying to disrupt people's current lives. So when you have this, and you can see now how you can imagine, hopefully you can start to imagine how you want to use this system to report what is going on. You would like to be able to show these maps that combine layers. You would like to be able to combine, say, some layers that come from your private organization, so you're the government of Costa Rica, and you have some additional layers. For example, you might have layers where you know where the agriculture is and what type of agriculture is being grown in any given part of the country. If you have those layers, you can assemble them into maps like this. You can export this to put it into your final reports, like the 7NR national reporting that we expect to come up in future years. But what you would really like to do, I believe, is that you would like to have to start to do monitoring on top of this type of capability. So if you have a national plan and you have areas that you would like to protect, how do you know if those protection areas are being effective? And so at the moment, we have some data sets that have time coverage. For example, Global Forest Watch's annual tree loss has some measure of deforestation through time, which you can start to look at where there is change happening through time. But for many of the data sets, either they are static, so they only have one time step, or they are reasonably coarse in spatial resolution. So for example, here is the 300-meter ESA CCI data set, and there is a 100-meter ProbaV data for 1 year at the moment. These are still reasonably coarse spatial resolution land use land cover maps. So one additional capability that's coming into this, that we are working with UN to introduce to this system, but this is still a future capability, it's not a capability right at the moment, is the ability to add dynamic land use land cover that is higher spatial resolution and is also updated at on a more frequent basis and a more recent basis. So for example, this is a map for 2015. The most recent ESA map is from 2018. What we're now able to add, I'll make sure that we have the right layers chosen here, is we're now able to add new land use land cover that's at 10 meters per pixel. So here we're looking at, this is a sneak peek of a data set that's being developed in collaboration between National Geographic Society, Google, and World Resources Institute, where we're processing Sentinel-2 satellite imagery using machine learning algorithms. So these are deep learning computer vision algorithms trained on an exceptionally large training data set that was created for this project with funding from the Gordon and Betty Moore Foundation. And in combination, this new capability lets us hopefully go from a globally consistent map that goes from this type of spatial resolution to this type of spatial resolution, which is comparable to the best national maps that anybody has, and is hopefully going to reveal some interesting things. And not only does this data set allow us to improve land use land cover, but this time series of land use land cover will be updated annually. And that annual update will allow us to turn a number of the data sets that are currently static, for example, the carbon map, into an annual estimate of regions where carbon storage change is occurring, or regions where biodiversity intactness is being impacted, or regions where the human footprint, which is currently on a reasonably coarse grid, is undergoing change, right? And also to resolve this into a much better resolution view. So I shall pause there.
Thank you, Steve. And is the pause the end of your presentation, that I don't make the same mistake as with Annie I just made a few moments ago. Thank you so much. It's a great presentation, and it really sort of sets the imagination sort of on a run there in terms of the applications and the things that you can do. Before we starting to sort of come towards a wrap up, I want to ask David whether he has any questions. I also have one comment so far, or request inquiry about how are we going to communicate and reach out to potential users. A question around the communication strategy to Annie and possibly Jamie. But first, David.
Thanks, Coralie, and thanks to everybody that joined today. As one of the original members on the UN Biodiversity Labs team, I couldn't be more thrilled to see this this evolution. This is fantastic. As I said in the chat, my mind has been blown in terms of how far you've come with it. So hats off, congratulations. 4 quick points that I wanted to make very briefly. One, I think this is such a brilliant example of collaboration across multiple agencies and groups, and this is exactly sort of indicative of the digital transformation mindset, where you can bring these different capacities together and make such a fantastic platform. So I really hope we can continue and find other ways to leverage this. The second thing I wanted to point out here is this is such a great example of, I think, user-centered design and listening to user feedback. That's been a central part of the Biodiversity Lab, I think, from the outset. And I just wanted to point out how much you've done that and how much you've iterated on that basis, and how fundamentally important that is to get a good product. So congratulations on that. The third point is, again, this is a great example of a technology pivot. You started with one technology in one stack, it wasn't meeting your needs, and you pivoted to another one very rapidly, and this one is meeting your needs, and that's great. So you had the courage to figure out what the limitations of your technology stack were and move on to something that was better, and that's just really fantastic. And the final point is now, of course, sort of the question, how do we leverage this? And, you know, how could we potentially build or use this similar stack for other applications that we might have beyond biodiversity? So, for example, for our climate action work or for pollution monitoring, is there a way we could leverage the stack? And how can we begin to connect this into a broader digital ecosystem for the planet? Thanks.
Wow, fantastic. Jamie, would you like to respond to that?
I would. Thank you so much. And David, it was such a joy to actually birth this together with you and colleagues at MapX. We're seeing an explosion of use cases. And so, for example, the government of Peru is saying, wow, this is great. We want to use this to map a green recovery from COVID for our country. And as soon as that happened, we have a whole use case around indigenous people saying, hey, we want to do an ELSA for our own use. And then in Colombia, where we had a national process, we now have a request from the government that said, we actually want to do an integrated water management planning process using the same kind of data, the same prioritization process. I think the question now is simply keeping up with demand. So we're trying to anticipate use cases, but this is an all of UN endeavor, because we have things like disaster risk recovery or regenerative agriculture or just the wide range of uses. So really we're just at the frontier of packaging data in such a way that it really is useful for countries to look at that insight between one data layer and another. Over.
Thank you very much, Jamie. Anyone else? Steve, did you want to respond to some of David's comments?
Just to say thank you very much. This has been a lot of work by a large team, and it's been very generously supported by both the Gordon and Betty Moore Foundation, National Geographic Society, and also by UN. We had a key grant from UN in the last year that was essential to getting this software to the point where it can be reach this level. And we just appreciate the opportunity to do this. And we're very supportive of Jamie frequently talks about how this is starting in the area of support for the Convention on Biological Diversity, but the intention here, the ELSA process, is inherently a cross-convention optimization tool and for countries, and we are very much interested in exploring how this type of capability can be extended to all the Rio conventions and to support the SDGs.
Fantastic. Thank you, Steve. There was a comment in the chat box. Matt, I assume it's you, Matt Pillard, that had a question.
Hi, Corley. Hi, colleagues. I hope you're well. Thank you for giving me the floor. Fantastic presentation, fantastic piece of work. Really, really impressed. My questions are probably quite naive, actually. Do you have or will you put on layers that show the street maps and habitation and so forth? Because obviously the human interaction with this is critical, and there is urban sprawl, there is uncontrolled development, there's slum development, many things not necessarily in Costa Rica, but across the world. The JRC did a human settlement map. I'm not sure how valid that would be, but that would be one sort of human biodiversity interaction issue. Okay, now you're showing me some high resolution, because you talked between 300 meters and 10 meters. This is, I think, a lot to do with what the policymakers want to see. Exactly where is it? We've been looking, yes, this is perfect. Okay, so I think you've answered that. My second point would be around other environmental aspects that I think are very important to biodiversity and human settlement as well, which includes hydrological basins and the water systems. So I'm wondering if those are also integrated, and I'm probably asking stupid questions, but I'm just wondering how that integrates with the data layers. But overall, absolutely impressed. Fantastic effort to all of you. Congratulations. Thank you.
Thank you, Matt. Steve, are you the guy to respond to those questions?
So I was just showing an example of, and I'm trying to see if this particular demo has, so one of the strengths of the new system is that we can support any geospatial polygon and automate the updating of these metrics for that region. So if I simply look at all the places, so it might not be on here right at the moment, but we have the ability to show any geospatial area. So if you're interested in watersheds, we will have a basic set of watersheds. We will have a basic set of ecoregions coming from standard published science data sets. And we can have, for those regions, we can have a dashboard where the metrics are updated. So you can really think of this as this is a way to show analysis, automated analysis for any geospatially defined region. We are also going to add the ability to, for the user to be able to specify a set of geospatial defined polygons as a collection, and then have the system automatically report the metrics for that collection of geospatially defined polygons. So for example, let's go back to, for example, Costa Rica, and Costa Rica has a number of protected areas, national parks and things. Imagine being able to provide the statistics, not just for the whole country, but also for the collection of polygons that constitutes the protected areas within the country. Actually, another example of this is if we go to the indigenous peoples groups. So let me turn off some of these other ones. There we go. Here we have a collection of areas that are just for these indigenous peoples groups. And here we have the metrics for just the indigenous peoples groups. And we can also look at the complement of this, the areas that are not in the indigenous lands. Okay. The other thing you asked about was high resolution data. So this is a data set that we're preparing to add to the platform. And when we add data to the platform, we've been helping to develop this with UN, but we wait for UN to approve data sets as they come onto the system. So we have a in development layer here, which actually provides resolution of within urban areas, land use within urban and settlement areas at 5 meters per pixel, derived from publicly available, totally free Sentinel-2 data through machine learning. And this additional map that separates urban and settlement areas into non-residential areas, residential areas, open space, and road networks. This is being developed. we develop it, we can share it with our colleagues in our private workspace, we can share it with our the science teams at UNEP WCMC and at UNDP. And then as it's ready, as it is published, there can be, in a very formal sense, it can be accepted and then transferred over to be available to everybody. And yeah, we're very much agree. Being able to do this globally for the world's changing cities and track this through time is a very important capability that we're very happy to be on the road to delivering to UNBL.
Thank you, Steve. I have a request for the floor from Abdelmenem as well. I'm just also mindful that in a few minutes, Jamie's other day job is going to start in terms of the organizing call for the Nature for Life Hub in the margins of the UN General Assembly. So Jamie, we understand. And speaking of the Nature for Life Hub, please have a look at the program on the 28th of September, where there's a packed agenda in launching all sorts of interesting things. But first, Abdelmenem, are you still online?
Yes. Thank you, Corley. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, thank you very much for the excellent presentation and for the whole session. This is really very informative, and we learned a lot from this, and we are really looking forward to cooperate with you. I am here in West Asia office, regional office for UNEP in Bahrain, covering 12 countries, including Iraq, where we have 2 projects for the time being under the GEF or funded by the GEF. One is related to protected area management, and the other one is related to establishing environmental information system. And we are in the early stages of designing the environmental information system. And my question is, what kind of steps or stages that we can save, in our designing the information system, in case if we decide to collaborate with the UN Biodiversity Lab, so that we can save some steps in designing the whole system, maybe to integrate the 2 systems together. I don't know if my question is clear enough or I need to elaborate a little bit.
So maybe if I can start with the response is from our side, from UNEP and UNEP WCMC side, we're very aware that in the context of COVID and the recovery, that there's enormous pressure on us also to demonstrate efficiency and convergence and avoid duplication. So we are extremely open and would welcome opportunities to rather bring our tools and platforms together and make sure that we use some of the same data layers and these type of things, so that the investment redundancy and inefficiencies are reduced, and we make sure we invest in those tools and the data layers that can actually serve the needs across the institution. So that is just from a sort of a bigger picture policy or approach in how we're trying to bring the tools together for biodiversity, or for sort of bringing biodiversity into sustainable development. But I don't know, from David or Steve's side, sort of different aspects of it, whether you have any specific guidance or responses on Abdelmenem's question.
Thank you.
I don't have any specific responses, but I mean, it's a great question. I think the other question is, how do we begin to use this platform to support automated reporting? I know when we set up the BioLab to begin with, that was one of the hopes, is that the reporting process for the ACHI targets could be digitalized and go into a common platform. I guess what has to happen now with the Biodiversity Convention to kind of get this digital reporting happening, and how far away are we from actually receiving reports in digital format and having kind of better real-time monitoring?
Yes, and that's a good question. Sorry to jump in, Steve. And there was a comment from Eva also in terms of the investment in that's available in other platforms such as Informia and some of the decision support that we've developed over the years to support the implementation of the conventions. And there's also, as you know, the online reporting system. There's a whole investment in the DART, which is a space for countries to work on reporting within, across ministries within the countries that Switzerland and the European Commission are investing in. And I think we need to spend a little bit of time to work out the synergies and how do we connect these things, because evidently a lot of or some, not necessarily a lot, some of the reporting can be generated through a platform such as UN Biodiversity Lab, and we need to work to make sure that we can bring the pieces together.
Yeah, not only that, but I think it's obvious that we need a similar platform for climate monitoring and a similar platform for pollution monitoring. And if we could have, you know, one platform like this per thematic in the MTS, that, you know, that's what we have to achieve eventually. So it would be great to have that broader conversation, I guess, with NGS about how can we now take this stack, this architecture, and potentially repurpose it as we go for other very similar purposes.
Mm-hmm. And the only other thing I would add is thank you very much for your question. And we would love to hear, like David mentioned, we take it very seriously that we want people to find this system useful and usable. So what I would like to suggest is that through our UNDP and UNEP WCMC colleagues, we're very open to having some additional meetings with folks who are working on projects at the moment to perhaps provide a longer demo that's specific to your region or country of interest, and to hear from you. What are the data sets you currently have access to and are using? And what are the features that you wish you had that would make your work better and easier and more successful and impactful to your stakeholders? And by doing the work of having those conversations, that's the way that this has reached the level of success that we currently have.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Steve.
Okay, thank you. And thank you everybody for your attendance to date and these fantastic set of questions. Fortunately, I have a number of colleagues who have really helped put this together, including Samantha Hyde and Dan Clausen and Rachel Anderson and a whole team of developers, some of whom are lurking on the call and are furiously recording everybody's comments so that we can fold this additional feedback into the system.
Stephen, before we jump off, I think there are some other colleagues that have questions, but one question came in, I don't know if you saw it, from Pooja, who was asking, how long did it take to migrate between different stacks? So between version 1 and version 2, what was the migration time?
Yeah, this has been really, it's been a 2.5-year process of developing this software. Initially developed at National Geographic Society to support conservation groups for protected areas and the regions around the spatial context of protected areas. And then this particular work, developing it specifically to support UN Biodiversity Lab, has happened over the last 12 months. With generous support from National Geographic Society and the Gordon and Betty Moore Foundation, and in the last year also support from UN Development Program, which we're very appreciative of.
Great. So Coralie, do we still have time for some more questions?
Well, I promised Annie that she can speak about communications and engagement strategy. I see some of them were addressed in the chat box, but I just want to hand back to Annie to see if she has any additional comments. I see also we've lost a number of colleagues already that had other, unsurprisingly, calls that they need to go to. But first, Annie, please.
Sure, thanks, Coralie. So just to emphasize for those who weren't following in the chat, what you saw today was a sneak peek just for all of our UNEP colleagues, and we'll be publicly launching the new version of the site in January of 2021. As all of you are probably aware, the international events calendar keeps changing on us. So we're trying to match up what the best venue would be for that official launch. And we'll be doing a variety of communications products, trainings, etc. around that launch. Coralie, I don't know if the initial question was about just communications around the platform in general, but just to very briefly speak to that, we try to focus all of our communications on examples of use cases from the countries that we work with. So over the course of the 6 National Reporting Project, we featured countries through webinars, through blogs, through presentations at major international events. And right now, we're particularly focusing on our ELSA pilot countries to show how they're using spatial data to meet their national priorities across biodiversity, climate, and sustainable development. So stay tuned. We will make sure that all of this group has more information as we formally launch the platform in early 2021 and make sure that you're able to access it as well.
Thank you, Annie. I think that is more or less the duration of the call, but as Annie said, we can, well, first of all, this recording will be available. We can host other sessions, or as Steve indicated, maybe at a regional level, bring some of you guys together and we can talk about region-specific needs or sectoral needs. And these are all part of making sure that we make biodiversity data accessible, relevant, and it informs decisions, most importantly. So with that, I would like to close this webinar. Thank you so much to UNDP colleagues and to Steve for your presentation and for everyone that provided input in organizing this. Annie has very kindly posted our contact details in the chat box. If you have any questions you would like to follow up, please be in touch with your questions and we'd be happy to respond to those. And final reminder, launch date January 2021, but have a look at the Nature4 Hub events at the end of this month and you'll see a lot more being brought together. Thank you so much, colleagues. Thank you for participating and for joining this first dialogue. And we look forward to many more. Bye for now.
Well done, colleagues.
Cheers. Thank you.
Thanks so much, everyone.